and well met, weary travelers. My name is Macuette, and welcome to another episode of r/RPG Horror Stories. In this story, we're looking at a petulant man-child and his attempts to force the other players in his group to be audience members, not participants, audience members, in his xenophobic Pokemon fanfiction. This story is brought to us by Acrobat on Internet and is titled, "My xenophobic jerkassery is perfectly in character and you should respect it by dropping your perfectly in character mistrust and antipathy. Now go serve as the audience for my characters and their heroics." I am an on and off lurker and first time poster with a story from just a few days ago. TLDR. The guy makes all of his characters dangerous, aggressive, and xenophobic transhumans that insult, demean, and threaten everyone else, then gets offended when everyone else starts avoiding them and acting mistrustful and fearful towards them. He defends his unpleasant behavior, and openly states he's not going to change it because it's in character, then demands everyone else changes their in-character behavior because he finds it unpleasant. Also, main character syndrome, hypocritical issues with other players, and attempts at hijacking and derailing the plot he himself proposed in the first place. The roleplay was, still is, fortunately no longer with the problem guy, a typical generic Discord isekai RP between Pokemon fanfic writers. Yes, I know, stereotypes, but everyone there but that one guy is actually a mature, reasonable, and fun person, with the characters from our respective fanverses being summoned into a sort of empty, post-apocalyptic world and trying to survive and find their way back. There wasn't any real limit on how many characters there could be per player, so the in-story cast was quite large. Besides me, there were 4 other people, but only 2 of them are actually important for the story. Let's call them Misty and Brock. Misty, the one who proposed the idea of the roleplay, the admin of the RP server, and the problem guy. The fanfic he writes revolves around a remote island separated from the rest of the Pokemon world and engulfed in a civil war. The people of said island can harness the power of Pokemon types through 18 magical stones. Also, a few hundred years back, they suffered from a plague accidentally brought over by outsiders. As a result of those 3 facts, most of his characters are highly trained soldiers, even without their Pokemon. Many are powerful transhumans with elemental powers, and every single one of them is deeply xenophobic, with the exact flavor varying from deep mistrust and dismissiveness of those not of their island, all the way up to murder on sight towards anyone they suspect might not be a member of their specific faction. You can already tell this is gonna be fun. Yeah, already after reading that, I can see the red flags from here. If I was a player in this game, I would have already dropped it, cause nothing good can come from this brand of xenophobia. I know it's been done right before. Take a look at elves from D&D, for example, and their mistrust of dwarves and other races, yet their ability to look past those differences and team up with them for the greater good of all. But this deep-seated hatred for anything not them, I feel, is going to be a serious detriment. Brock, the person most open about their dislike of Misty's characters, roleplaying, and general behavior, did some attempts at damage control and tried putting the game back on track. So, where do we start? As already mentioned earlier, we didn't limit ourselves to just one character per person. For the introduction scene, most of us had 2 to 3 characters. Misty? 5 from the very beginning and almost immediately started adding more. I quickly became confused and requested him to slow down and set up a channel for describing our cast. He did, and everyone went to list their characters and give them short descriptions. He himself wrote down the names of just his starting 5 characters and absolutely nothing else. Then never opened the channel again and continued to add loads and loads of new OCs without any warning, heads up, or context on who they are. Not quite a red flag yet, but already a yellow one. The story soon took the survival game direction, with our characters setting up the first camp, finding food and water, and building shelters. Add in a bunch of interactions with our characters starting out confused and scared as they slowly realize they've been thrown into this unfamiliar world with people from other unfamiliar worlds. It was really fun and allowed development in the direction that wouldn't be otherwise possible. There was already some drama between characters and a few insults thrown, mostly by Misty's OCs, but at this point it was fun roleplay, and his behavior felt justified. At the same time, though, Misty started slowly raising a first red flag in the form of 2 additional camps he set up away from the main one, both populated exclusively by his characters, at least until one of the other players put some of their yet unintroduced characters there just so it wouldn't be just Misty alone. As explained by in-character exposition dialogue, said camps represented the 2 sides of his fixed civil war, which of course, they weren't going to drop over something as small and unimportant as being suddenly shifted to a different dangerous world. For future reference, we'll call those 2 factions Faction A and Faction B. Unlike our characters, who arrived with pretty much only clothes on their back and some basic tools at most, both of those groups were warped in already with large amounts of rations, medicine, weapons, and other supplies. Enough to survive for weeks and even share, completely defeating the entire survival angle that we were promised and came for. And he wasn't going to just let them sit around and reserve them for just those 2 groups of his characters. It was quickly made clear that Faction A had already scouted out our camp and planned to either force us to join them or run us off so we'd have to join Faction B. As for a fighting chance, they had an army, both of them, and not just a TRPG-style ridiculously small army of named characters like what we'd see in Fire Emblem or Shining Force. They were both shifted in with actual armies, hundreds if not thousands strong, of nameless and faceless NPCs that only serve to make sure we have no way of facing them head-on, and in case of direct confrontation, are forced to do what he says. Okay, I can already see what this is leading up to be. It's Misty's fanfiction with the other players being side characters to Misty's own OCs in this civil war, instead of them all working together in this post-apocalyptic world. I've seen this type of thing done before in other stories I've heard, but this honestly probably takes the cake. Back to the main camp, where the first major conflict was about to happen. As a result of one of the earlier mentioned in-character dramas, 1 character each of mine and Misty ended up far away from camp. We stumbled upon some ancient ruins where we encountered Brock's, who only just joined, first character. Essentially a Ninetales Kitsune witch, trying to figure out what happened and why she was suddenly teleported to another world. Her attempt at finding it out with help from her magic only resulted in summoning a bunch of monsters tailor-made to counter her powers, forcing her to look to us for help. Misty immediately wants to run away and get help, and only reluctantly agrees to fight after I pointed out our camp is miles away, and by the time we get there and back, the Ninetales will already be dead. And so we start the battle. My character is a Pokemon researcher who can only just about hold his own in a Pokemon battle, and doesn't even have his full team on hand. Some of his Pokemon stayed at camp, while others got lost while they were shifted in. And Ninetales' powers are, as already mentioned, useless against the monsters. Our only hope is Misty's character, and indeed, he carries us for the first half of the fight. Until he's targeted by one of the monsters and my character pushes him out of the way, at which point he gets annoyed, yells about how he doesn't need help from me, then abandons us to fight the rest of the battle ourselves. The fight quickly turns from one we had in the bag into a difficult one that could have easily gotten us killed, as Misty describes his character angrily walking away with absolutely no sign of urgency and nothing about his behavior pointing towards him intending to bring back help. Never mind that, as already mentioned, the camp was too far away for it to arrive in any reasonable amount of time. Fast forward a bit later, Misty's PC returns to camp, then sits down far away from everyone and starts sulking, again giving no sign of urgency. One of my characters back there even specifically walked up and asked if anything was wrong. He just told them to go away. Soon afterwards, mine and Brock's characters come back, battered and bruised, with all but one of my PC's on-hand Pokemon injured and in need of medical attention. After some quick first aid roleplay, my character angrily walks up to Misty's and demands to know why he left them for almost certain death. Misty starts angrily explaining, both in character and out of character, how I am wrong and his character was trying to get help for a fight I'd stupidly pulled him into, and which we couldn't win alone. I immediately start pointing holes in his reasoning. We were winning until he ran away. The camp was too far away to get help from, and he knew that, and most importantly, his character showed absolutely no sign of urgency, calmly walking away from the fight and then sitting down to sulk after arriving at camp, doing nothing to signal that anything is wrong even after being specifically inquired. He continues to talk about how I'm wrong, not actually addressing any of my points. Hearing that, my character's Eevee, who was one of the Pokemon who stayed at the camp, pounces on him and angrily swipes at his face. Note that Eevee is a tiny and weak Pokemon more suitable as a pet than an attack animal, similar in strength and size to a house cat. The moment was intended, and I made it clear, as both a further call-out and establishment of how loyal said Eevee is toward his human, not an attempt at seriously harming Misty's guy. His response is to have two of his characters run away, yelling about how evil my characters are. His other characters then gang up on mine, insulting and threatening him and his Eevee for attacking the poor kid for no reason, and not knowing how to handle his Pokemon. One of them suddenly reveals that he has psychic powers and can detect lies, something not established before, says that both you and him were right to some extent. You just misunderstood each other. Then proceeds to explain how his character was 100% right on every account and mine was completely wrong about everything. He proceeds to guilt trip me into finding his runaway characters and apologizing to them. At the same time, Faction A makes the move against our camp. They come in from all directions with loaded crossbows, demand that we come with them to their camp and prove our intentions are not hostile. Then proceed to kidnap all but two of our characters, my Pokemon researcher who was away looking for Misty's guys, and Brock's Kitsune, who told them point blank she's not going to let them push her around at crossbow point, and then claims she's the hostile and trustworthy one, then ran away. Once in the camp, it quickly becomes clear that Misty just wants our characters to act as an audience, not even participants, audience, for his versus Civil War that none of our characters had any stakes or interest in. All the while, he makes it clear that his characters are very mistrustful and hostile and only barely tolerate our presence. Called it! Back to my character, he only found one of Misty's runaways, an autistic, disabled boy who can't walk without crutches. After a short interaction, my character suddenly gets ambushed by Misty's newly introduced PC. As mentioned earlier, he would add them in without any warning or context to them, whenever and wherever it suited him. He orders his Houndoom to lunge at my character, breathing fire. I proceed to fight back as he reveals his other Mon, Galvantula. Now, pop quiz. You have two attack animals on hand. One is a massive horned hellhound breathing cursed fire. The other is a giant spider capable of precisely shooting strong webs that can, but don't have to be, electrified. Which one are you going to pick when trying to harmlessly incapacitate your target? And which one are you going to pick when wanting to make absolutely sure your target will be completely, utterly, and irrevocably dead? In my case, I'll pick the spider for scenario A and the hound for scenario B. And with that in mind, I reasonably assumed my enemy is going for the kill and acted accordingly, fighting back like both my and the kid's life depended on it. He proceeds to yell at me to give up and promising to spare me if I do, all the while continuing his Houndoom's fiery onslaught. Again, he started the fight with the most lethal option available and did nothing to de-escalate. Once I point this out, he calls me stupid and unreasonable. At the same time, the kid suddenly starts attacking my Pokemon and demanding I stand down, not giving any explanation for why. In the struggle, he drops his crutches. I'm now now getting really tired of this guy and his characters. I proceed to pull his own trick and suddenly introduce a new character just to bail myself out for the fight. Only now does Misty reveal that the guy was the kid's caretaker and he attacked me because he assumed I kidnapped him and that if I surrendered like he asked, he wouldn't hurt me. And would take me to Faction A camp where the rest of our characters were being held. Of course, I am the dumb and hostile one for refusing to surrender to a guy who in character gave me every possible reason to assume he wants to kill me and out of character is trying to turn the game into an extension of his own fanfic. The guy tracks my characters down in a ridiculously short amount of time and resumes the fight. Now, another pop quiz. A disabled kid in your care just dropped his crutches and now can't walk, while you want to chase after the guy who you believe tried to kidnap them. Will you, A, simply pick up the crutches that are lying right there and give them back to the kid, or B, make a scene about the kid being unable to walk, then give them a piggyback? Will you A, abandon the chase that you have nothing to gain from altogether, B, continue the chase but leave the kid behind with one of your powerful Pokemon, or C, continue the chase with the kid in tow and lethal intent in mind? If options B and C were what you picked, you probably won't be winning many Parent of the Year awards, and of course that's what Misty went with. Which, unfortunately, I only learned after my character ordered his Luxray to pounce at him, thus accidentally hurt the kid in the process. Something that, of course, is completely, utterly, and exclusively my fault and further marks me as a dangerous, sociopathic, and dumb off-islander who needs to be eliminated. Pretty much the only reason I escaped was because the members of Faction B then arrived, further injured the child and left him for dead, then took his caretaker hostage, which he, of course, tries to frame as entirely my fault and attempts to once again guilt-trip me into going back and helping them. Around this point, Brock had enough of Misty's bullshit and started setting his own plot, which, as he freely admitted to me in DMs, would have never happened had it not been for Misty, revolving around a city to the far west, where the last of the world's natives live in peace with people from other worlds while trying to figure out why all the isekai shit is happening and why the world was ruined. They will accept anyone so long as they're willing to work together with others, meaning that Misty's characters are out by default unless they can let go of their war, and have their own defense force, meaning he can't strong-arm them in the same way he did to the survivors camp. He also sets up the plot threads to get other players here, where we can either follow his plot or do our own things without worrying about Misty's armies and wars. Now it's just the matter of freeing the hostages at the camp. My characters now split up, with one going to the city and pulling on the plot Brock set up, while the other stays behind. He soon runs into yet another of Misty's characters, who once again reveals himself as psychic and starts talking about how everything that happened was my fault, and his people are blameless, while treating it as indisputable fact because his character is psychic. This time I didn't let that pass and told him, both in character and out of character, that his character magically conjuring a sign saying I'm right and you're wrong doesn't prove that his character is right and mine is wrong. It only proves that his character can magically conjure a sign saying I'm right and you're wrong. He ignores it and continues to talk about how aggressive and unreasonable my character is. After much persuasion, Misty agrees to have Faction A finally see the characters held hostage at their camp are not hostile, and as such allows them to leave whenever they want. Yet at the same time, keeps talking about how stupid and unreasonable it would be because you have free food and medicine here. And when my characters make it clear they don't intend to stay in a war camp of xenophobic factions any longer than necessary, he further tries to guilt-trip me into staying by revealing one of his starting characters is secretly the son of a terrorist who started the Civil War. He risks persecution if he's found out, and he looks towards my characters for defense. Never mind that out of everyone present, my characters were the most normal, down-to-earth, slice-of-life non-combatants, something that I pointed out to him several times. As one last attempt at making peace with Misty, myself, Brock, and one of the other players get our characters together and agree to temporarily put Brock's plot on hold and follow the kidnapped guy. We spend about a week setting up this badass infiltration of Faction B's camp, watching every step to make absolutely sure there's nothing that could possibly go wrong. We're literally already in front of the guy's cell with keys in hand and are now setting up an extraction, at which point one of his characters, Faction A's spy, but he gives us no in-character clue he's one, orders us to stand down. Brock has one of his characters sneak up on him and try to take him hostage. He responds by raising alarm, despite literally having a knife on his throat, no way to stop him from killing him if he does anything funny, and no reason to actually do anything funny. We're now forced to run, at which point the spy casually opens the cell and just walks the prisoner out and past the guards with no explanation, while making it perfectly clear that he could have done it from the very beginning and our entire action was pointless all along. He was basically taunting us with how he won't allow us to be heroes. No longer willing to have anything to do with him and his civil war, we have all of our characters pack up and leave for Brock City. There, Misty introduces yet another character, an 8-year-old boy, who, of course, is a psychic. Within 5 minutes of his introduction, proceeds to see the past events, calls us bad people for abandoning Faction A after everything they did for us, demands that we stop acting hostile towards everyone we don't like, and tries to yet again guilt-trip us into going back. At this point, we're all officially fed up with everything about Misty and his characters, and we make it clear to him. He refuses to take any criticism, and tells us to grow a spine instead of whining about how he plays. He's angry about the unnecessary hostility of my Eevee scratching his character, and later on Brock threatening his spy with a knife after the latter literally snuck up on them in the middle of the dangerous mission and gave them no reason to assume he's on their side, yet tries to brush off his characters casually throwing death threats or pulling weapons at us, and at a few points actually trying to kill us as fine, because they don't trust you, and you can't make them trust you. He keeps insisting that I constantly misinterpret his intentions, and when I point out how said intentions completely don't mesh up with his actions, he replies that his psychic characters confirmed said intentions to be genuine, and as such I am wrong whether I like it or not, and he doesn't need to further justify them. When asked to tone down his character's xenophobia, he adamantly refused. It's in character. They lived in fear of anyone not from their island for generations, and there's nothing you can do to change that. Go and read up on how such epidemics affected real-life civilizations and you'll see I'm right. Then, in literally the very next sentence, he demanded that we stop acting distrustful towards his characters and avoiding them. To clarify, he didn't use it as a counter-argument, nor did he try to bargain that he'll drop his hostility if we drop ours. He made it perfectly clear he's not going to drop his character's behavior just because it makes us uncomfortable, because it's in character. Then, literally the very next sentence, he demanded that we drop our own in-character reactions because they ruined the fun for him. He insists that Brock City is no different from his factions, yet somehow we don't ask him to change it, ignoring that Brock only set it up specifically to counter his factions, never forced us to come or stay there, provided us with plot threads, but never demanded we actually take them, and most importantly let our characters follow said plot themselves, rather than having them watch as his characters do it alone. He attacks me for purposely making weak characters, which, as I mentioned earlier, was true, then accuses me of not wanting to actually accept my characters are weak and trying to nerf everyone else, which is completely untrue. I never wanted my characters to be powerful combatants, and never had any problem with Brock and the rest being stronger. What I and everyone else was angry about was how Misty was using his character's strength and numbers to centralize the plot and make the story all about himself and his war. When pointed out how his characters are completely unbeatable and never suffer any serious wounds, he attempts to turn it around and claim our characters never get injured, while his constantly have bad things happen towards them. This one was downright delusional. Every single battle I got into ended with at least one of my Pokemon badly injured. In one case, my Leafeon had to spend 2 weeks resting and recuperating after having half of his head leaf burned off. Brock's Kitsune similarly kept getting bruised and beaten. The worst that ever happened to Misty's characters was a light cut his spy received during confrontation at Faction B's camp, which he tried to pass off as a grievous injury and a proof that our necessary hostility, even though it didn't slow him in any way, and he casually patched it up seconds later, never to be mentioned again. Finally, after a long argument, I just straight up left, set up a new server, copied as much of the previous one as I could, then invited everyone but Misty to continue the game here. Unsurprisingly, they all agreed. Brock made one last attempt at convincing Misty, noting that his story still had a decent amount of potential and could be very fun if he took it slightly differently, and respected the other players. Misty once again refused to accept he did anything wrong, tried to paint himself as a victim, and demanded we come back and play on his terms. There's nothing inherently wrong with having your characters act hostile, but making said hostility hard-coded and impossible to change and demanding that other players not only accept it, but treat it as perfectly normal, all the while forcing yourself onto them and trying to thwart any attempts to escape you and your characters, is very wrong. End of story. Wow. I have never seen anyone so delusional and manipulative as this. I think this is the worst case of this I've seen in years, if not my entire life. I don't know how old this guy is, but he acts like a spoiled, petulant 12-year-old who's playing on the playground with his friends and constantly changes the rules of the game to make sure he wins. Nuh-uh, I grabbed your shirt, clothing counts. No, you just grabbed my shirt, clothing doesn't count. Ugh. Not to mention, like OP said, making your character psychic doesn't change anything about who's right or wrong. Just because you have a sign saying so doesn't change the reality of the situation. And with that, we shall conclude for the day. I hope you all enjoyed. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and we hope to see you all next time.